This episode is sponsored by Clark and Enersen.
This is the Commonwealth, where we interview leaders of disruptive change. On this episode, we're talking with Kate and Shawn from Clark and Enersen, a nationally recognized design firm here in Lincoln, Nebraska. The firm is celebrating 75 years in business, and I can't wait to uncover how the firm has shaped our community and has also pushed the industry forward. But to start with, I know, I guess what a design firm is, what the words mean separately, but if you two could kind of walk through exactly what Clark and Enersen does, I think that's a good way to kick the conversation off.
So, yeah, our firm, we're a design firm, like you mentioned, so that can mean a lot of different things in the building construction industry. But for us, we provide architecture, engineering, a variety of different engineering services, so mechanical, electrical, structural, civil engineering. We provide interior design. We provide laboratory planning, master planning, a variety of different planning. So we provide basically all the services it would take to design and document a building project. Beyond that, then, what we don't do is the construction side of things. So contractors would do that, and there's a variety of different ways that contractors get involved, but we handle meeting with clients, identifying needs that they have, and really trying to take their vision and turn it into a reality from a design standpoint.
Okay, so is there a specific type of building or industry that you all operate in?
Yeah, so we actually are a firm that kind of is a more general practice type of firm, but with a few kind of areas of depth and specialties. Okay. So historically, our firm has been around for 75 years. We're actually celebrating our 75th anniversary this year.
Exciting.
It is.
Yes.
Yeah. And we started off as a primarily architectural firm. So we really didn't have a huge engineering presence. We also had landscape architecture on as a discipline, as Shawn mentioned. But our work really started as more of the civic impact in the civic realm of Lincoln, Nebraska specifically. Okay. I would say it blossomed from there to kind of touch more of the corporate and library kind of realms. And then eventually we really kind of became a much more broad general practice. And now we have some areas of depth in the science and technology realm. So we do work nationally, actually technically internationally now.
Wow.
With an institution in Spain.
That's
so
exciting.
It is very exciting just to kind of see how it's broadened. And so it's been really cool to see, we have K-12 work, civic work, we do church architecture.
Okay, so civic, what does that mean exactly?
Civic is, I would say, anything that relates to the public realm. It's typically maybe government-owned types of projects, but occupied more by the public.
Okay. Yes, yeah. And so I didn't, I guess, fully appreciate all of the different buildings in Lincoln and Nebraska that Clark and Enersen has designed. What are some examples? The Commonwealth is partnered with Runza, and I have interviewed the president of Runza, so I went to their office, and before we started recording, you mentioned that Clark and Enersen designed the Runza office, which is beautiful. What other buildings like that around town would we be able to recognize?
So Assurity is one of our corporate partners.
Okay.
So the Assurity building on what's the
Antelope
Parkway, and then we also did the landscape architecture for Antelope Parkway, civil engineering for that.
Okay.
Yep. Centennial Mall is another one.
So that whole landscape area.
Yes.
Okay. And then the mall too, with the fountains and everything.
It's interesting. We designed that space twice. We designed it back in the 60s, I believe, and then we designed it again in the 2000s. So revisited it. Yeah.
Okay.
And then beyond that, we have other corporate partners that we have worked with. So UBT, we're working with them right now, actually on a project in Omaha for them. But then, as Kate mentioned, we've done a lot of work with LPS. So Lincoln High, Lincoln East, we're designing the 2 new high schools now, and then a variety of other projects for them too. And then maybe most notably or highly notably would be Memorial Stadium. So we did the North expansion, North edition for that, and then the East edition also, which are great when you're a Husker football fan. They're also incredibly stressful when you're a Husker football fan. You realize how important that is, and that building has to work on that first game. And yeah, very, very stressful.
So what goes into designing Memorial Stadium? That is a very, very cool project.
Yeah, so the East Stadium project, for example, I mean, all projects, a lot of different meetings, but the challenge with that one in particular is you're designing it to function on maybe 8 days a year, where it's going to be at full capacity.
Yeah.
Now, East Stadium also has some other components. There was a sub-project we did for the Center for Brain Biology and Behavior within it.
Yes, yeah.
That functions more regularly, but it's a challenge to make sure that the building's going to work when it's fully occupied, but also work when it's partially occupied also. So yeah, you're designing for peak conditions, but it also has to function at other times.
Yeah, what's one thing that like Husker Nation may not know about Memorial Stadium that as the designer, there's a different perspective on it?
Yeah.
If all the toilets flush at once,
If all the
it
toilets
will work.
flush at once. So on both the North Stadium project and the East Stadium project, we did something shortly before it was supposed to open called the Big Flush, where the university athletic department would get, and the contractors and our design firm, you'd have a lot of people and fill up every restroom with someone at each toilet or urinal, and then people were on walkie-talkies and everybody at once flush. Now, I have become more in tune with how often things actually flush during a game day. You will never have all the flushes at once. So it was a worst case condition to make sure that it was going to function even when the building was really, fully occupied. So it was able to work, but that was always something I worried about on the first game. In fact, we had one of our staff sitting in, it's called a mechanical room, where it's pumps and things are, watching a gauge throughout the game just to make sure things worked right. And I would call him every once in a while, how's it looking at halftime? We're good. So, so there's a lot of those kind of things that go into it.
Yes, that is a very good example. Yes. So, Kate, you are a laboratory planner, and Shawn, you're a senior principal. What exactly are those roles in like the world of architecture?
Yeah. So, senior principal, that's just a title within our firm.
Okay.
So our firm is we have a board of directors of 19 people. Kate is a principal in the firm. I'm a senior principal, but all of our senior principals and principals make up that group of 19. So that's just within our firm. Beyond that, I'm a mechanical engineer and one of the directors of engineering for our firm. So what that entails is mechanical engineering in the building industry is designing HVAC, piping, plumbing type systems. So I do that as on the professional side of things.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I'm a principal in the firm. I'm also an architect and a laboratory planner. So I do all types of architecture, but I would say one of my specialty areas is in science and technology. And so I do a lot of laboratory planning, laying out research environments, typically at higher ed institutions, sometimes veterinary clinics, human health clinics. And so that's a really fun project type. Never get tired of it.
Yes, yeah. Very interesting. I'm not like a science math person at all, so kind of going under the hood and learning more about it is very, very interesting. So Clark and Enersen has been around for 75 years, like we touched on. How much has the industry changed in that time period?
I would say pretty significantly. I think, we're actually going through a history book writing effort as part of our 75th anniversary this year. And so we're kind of understanding how our firm really started off and what the AE industry was like back then. And I think back then there was more of this mystique around what architects did. Mm-hmm. And I say architects without using the word engineers at the time, because I think the two were a little bit more divorced in terms of how they collaborated. I think there were sometimes big engineering firms and sometimes big architecture firms, and they would work together. But at the time, it seemed like it wasn't very common to have both be together in the same firm. Whereas now we are an AE equal. They always say there's a big A, little e sometimes, or a little a, big E, but we are, I would say, equal parts architecture, engineering, plus all of our other disciplines. And so I think it's really changed in the amount of collaboration available. And I think also the transparency is huge. I would say there's a lot less of that mystique around what an architect does. And we're probably like a little less cool than we used to be, but okay. Yeah, but a little bit more transparency into our design process and working with clients. They can see how we're designing in front of them, as opposed to, we disappear and come up with a masterpiece and try to sell it to them. So it's a little bit more collaborative in that regard.
The other thing I would add onto that too, you mentioned transparency about the process, but I think transparency in buildings has changed also over that time. Because architecture and the engineering systems that support it kind of reflect the culture that they're in. And 75 years ago, 50 years ago, things were more compartmentalized. You know, there were private offices, it was suit and tie, there were support staff, and people didn't mix. And things have shifted over time culturally too, where there is more blending, even just within our industry, but in other industries too, more openness, collaboration. And so buildings have started to reflect that too, where they're more transparent, and it's more, you're trying to showcase what is happening more to the outside and bring nature in. And along with that, maybe a renewed sense or a newer sense of sustainability and wellness that is taking place in culture is also translated itself into building design and architecture and engineering.
Yes, yeah. Throughout the 75-year history, and you also touched on, Kate, all of the different ways Clark and Enersen has expanded throughout the years. How has the firm continued to remain on the cutting edge of the industry and like remain on the forefront?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. You know, I like to think that as architects and engineers and landscape architects and all of our other disciplines, we're really not in it to like push forward our industry specifically. In a lot of ways, we're carried forward on the tides of our clients and their industries and their research, their educational methodologies, the corporate office space environments evolving. And in some ways, we're always trying to push forward our responsiveness to the changing industries of our clients, if you will. So I think we're always trying to stay on the forefront of what is up and coming in that regard. I think our job is to be responsive, and to me, that's the most exciting part of what we do. It's not necessarily to say, you know, we've changed the face of architecture, but instead we've allowed architecture to help change the face of a medical education building or a new K-12 school district or a corporate office building.
Yeah. Do you have a specific project that comes to mind when you're thinking about that?
Yeah, actually, there's probably a couple. These are two projects that Shawn and I both worked on. One of them is actually in Omaha at University of Nebraska Medical Center. It's called the Davis Global Center for Advanced Interprofessional Learning. It's a facility that is essentially 3 floors of medical education for multiple different disciplines: nursing, medicine, allied health, and there's simulated environments that really kind of push the envelope in terms of medical education.
Yeah, and that project was all based on, it was in the name, it's interprofessional, and so it is only focusing on programs or educational opportunities that involve multiple healthcare disciplines, bringing those together. Beyond that, it's expanded now to serve military and other things, where it's trying to really advance this interprofessional. It goes back to this collaboration idea on a broad scale, bringing all those things together to advance and enhance the educational opportunities. But with that project, I will say one other thing that was interesting about it was about halfway through the project, UNMC got some federal funding to develop a training and simulation and quarantine center. So it was quarantine for infectious diseases and some training for that. And so when COVID came to the U.S., to the shores, literally through the cruise ships, some of the first people in the United States were transported to that building, which was another nerve-wracking scenario because, nobody, COVID, we really, there were a lot of unknowns with it. But we were brought there. We actually were touring when they brought in some of the first people, happened to be touring another part of the building. And it worked well, and UNMC received great accolades, as they should. They're the leader in infectious disease research and treatment. And so, it's one of those gratifying projects to work on once you're assured that it's actually functioning the way it should.
And the whole mission behind that facility was to improve medical outcomes through better education. So in some ways, through the realm of architecture, we've had a tiny hand in improving medical outcomes in that regard.
Yes, yeah. When you go to design a space like that, how do you make sure that the space stays nimble in this like ever-changing technology or healthcare field? That's
a great question. It's a great challenge too. You asked the question earlier, how have things changed over 75 years? That is a component on all our projects now, is having a building that is flexible and can respond to not only needs day to day, but just different functions over time. So we spend a lot of time, Kate and I both work on a lot of our science and technology projects, and so there's a concept of modular design and trying to design with modules so that a space can change function. relatively easily. It can function under different scenarios, but then for the engineering systems behind it, there's infrastructure in place that can be easily adaptable. A lot of it happens through control systems that are in place so that you can change and we've seen this, to change the pressurization of a room if they happen to bring someone, in that case, like an infectious disease or someone who has been exposed to an infectious disease.
And that idea of flexibility really applies to, like, for example, a K-12 educational environment where you have to anticipate the pedagogies that would happen in the future, and, corporate office environments where at one point, open office was hugely popular, and now open office is scary to many people because of COVID, or it's too noisy because of all the Zoom calls. And so it's almost like you have to be able to anticipate and act as a little bit of a fortune teller about what the spaces will look like 5 years, 10 years from now, and enable them to have the infrastructure, as Shawn mentioned, these spatial constraints required to function in a variety of manners with minimal costs, changes, and additions.
Yes, yeah. And I have asked over the last year, have asked almost everyone I've talked to about how COVID has changed their industry. And I'm almost now getting tired of talking about COVID and the pandemic, but I am interested, especially when you talk about the collaborative space, how has that changed the spaces in which you design?
So COVID has changed the spaces that we design to a certain extent. Up to this point with COVID restrictions, a lot of people working from home. It hasn't necessarily increased the amount of space. It's just changed the way that it's used. People can spread out a little bit more. But we have that conversation with clients a lot, like what do we need to plan for moving forward? And unfortunately, no one has the golden ticket on exactly what that's going to look like. And I think it varies from client to client. Some say, we're expecting to bring everybody back and function the way we did. Others are thinking in the same amount of space, they might not require everybody to come back and allow people to work from home, and people can spread out further. So we don't exactly know where that'll go, but it goes back to that idea of flexibility, trying to predict. And an important part of our process is that transparency that Kate mentioned, and just letting our clients know that if you want ultimate flexibility, there's going to be a cost associated with it, and let them make the value decision on whether that's going to be a return on investment for them. Personally, or for our firm, COVID has affected us in a few ways, but I think an advantage that we've seen out of COVID and through Zoom calls and those kinds of things is it has made the world a lot smaller. So Kate mentioned that we're international now, working on a project in Spain. We were able to collaborate with some design firms in Spain and a university client over there, all through Zoom, and that wouldn't have been as easy or as possible without COVID, frankly, because it just became the expectation. We're going to have Zoom calls, and that made it a little bit easier for us. It's also presented some challenges because I think everybody's probably seen it. You get Zoom overload and meeting overload. It's really easy to invite everybody to every meeting, and so that presents some challenges too.
Yeah. Kate mentioned talking about predicting the future for all of the industries for all of your partners and what the workspace is going to look like. How do you begin to do that?
I think we talk through with the experts. When I say the experts, I mean our clients. I mean, they're the experts of what their spaces are, made out of and entail, and how they function. And, I think we have our own series of, the own amount of research that we do on the side, and we try to stay on the forefront of each of our market sectors in terms of, attending conferences. And so we're always kind of keeping our ear on the ground from that standpoint. But I think a lot of it is really relying on our clients and understanding and hearing what they say, how they predict using future spaces, and then we need to translate that into how the space would be designed to accommodate that. I think other times, you can kind of imagine how a space's use would evolve or could evolve. The more space you might provide in an active learning classroom, the more types of activities could occur there in the future. An active learning classroom is basically a classroom that shifts from being front-facing. You think of traditional, what's called a didactic classroom is when you have chairs all facing the front of a blackboard, chalk on the ledge, and an eraser. And then an active learning classroom is what you're seeing a lot more in both K-12 and higher education, where furniture is movable, writing surfaces cover 3 or 4 walls. Groups can cluster together, or everybody can face the front, interact with an instructor throughout the space. And so I think, as we start to, especially I would say those learning environments, I think there's a huge opportunity to understand future teaching methodologies. And a lot of that is going to be driven by the institutions and clients we work with.
I guess COVID really illustrated this, but things can happen that totally change the entire environment. And is there do you attempt to try to predict those or prepare for those at all? Or like they're unplanned, of course, and COVID's a very good example.
There's probably some things that you can plan for, some things you can predict. But as Shawn mentioned, when you design with flexibility in mind, sometimes you're designing completely for the unknown. So it's just trying to take our best stab at, designing spaces that probably from a system standpoint, I'm not going to try to pretend to be an engineer here, but
no, I would like to hear it.
Have flexible air change rates.
Sure, there you go.
Can you do that? I don't know. Can you do that?
Yes, you can.
Or movable walls or surfaces that can be used for rolling equipment in and out of, or acoustic types of applications that would allow for different noise levels happening in the space. I think there's just like a variety of ways that you can tackle it. But sometimes we are tasked with designing for the complete question mark, and we just have to kind of take our best guess at what that might mean.
Yeah. And the other, I guess, architecture/engineering specific question I have. So I put together media, and occasionally when a piece of media I put together does very well, it's just sort of like a weird moment to like, oh, that got 1 million views, and it's in my editing software, and I saw it raw and was the first one to put it together. When you go and see the buildings or the structures that you've designed, is it a similar sort of feeling?
I think sometimes it's really surreal. Like when we are building projects, we build them in the virtual world. We build them in a program called Revit, or there's a couple other programs we use, but you're seeing it at what you think to be a certain scale. And then you start to see it come out of the ground, and you start to see it, you're occupying the space that you remember being inside virtually.
Yeah. And buildings like impact culture and like society so much at large that I guess I don't always appreciate it when I'm walking down Lincoln Mall or walking through Antelope Parkway, but there is it's an aspect of the community that does have great impact.
And I think there's the appreciation, whether you know it or not, of some of those aspects of the project too. But we talked a couple times about how what our clients do is really important too, and that's oftentimes even more gratifying is seeing our clients succeed. And you see something in the newspaper that maybe or online that we weren't exactly sure about, but they're having great success, and it's in this space that we helped create through our software programs and our design and our creativity that really enabled them to succeed. And that's some of the most gratifying aspects of this job.
It's cool when you go around the city, or I'm just talking Lincoln now, and you hear somebody say, hey, my kid goes to Marilyn Moore Middle School, and you're like, oh, we designed that building. Yeah. Or I went for a swim this morning at Coppell YMCA. Oh, we designed that too. Yeah. So it's like you get to see a little bit of the impact you make in other people's lives, even though you may not have expected it. And
yeah. Do you ever know too much about the building? Like, oh, I know what classroom your kid, or oh, is it the third door down on the left, or anything like that? Or once it's built, you're on to the next thing. Or...
I think you do. A lot of what's happening behind the scenes on all the projects. I think we probably both do this, maybe me more. When you walk into a building, I immediately look up, because what I design is usually above a ceiling. And so I'm just trying to see, all right, well, how's this one laid out? And my family thinks I'm crazy for looking up all the time, but it helps you appreciate everything that goes into a project, because prior to getting into this field, I would just walk into a building like anybody else, and eyes on the ground, or 6 feet up above the ground, and never look anywhere else. And
I always love the first time that some of our younger staff go out on site and experience the project under construction that they worked on or they designed, and it's really incredible just to see them see the impact that they make, or the people that have been here for decades and decades, and the buildings that they can say that they've designed all over the country. And it's a really impressive thing.
Yes. Yeah. So last question for both you two. If you were to predict the future of architecture, what do you think that looks like and Clark and Enersen has been around and leading the industry for the last 75 years. 75 years from now, what do you think the industry will look like, and what role does the firm play in that?
I think, as I mentioned before, I think there's been a huge shift just in terms of how transparent and how much of a partnership architecture, engineering, landscape architecture have all kind of evolved to be with our clients. And I think that idea of partnerships is going to be something that becomes more and more prevalent. within our industry. I think, clearly we always have the relationship with each other, our different disciplines. We have a relationship with our clients, but I think we're going to start to see ourselves collaborating more and more with, people even outside of the industry, like marketers, visionaries, I think graphic designers. I think that idea of this collaborative type of network, in and outside of the industry is going to be the thing that primarily shapes projects in the future. Throughout the years, more and more delivery method types have evolved, and delivery methods are basically the way that a project is procured. So I would say a very traditional one has been design, bid, build, where you draw a set of documents, it goes out to a number of contractors to bid on, and they provide a cost, and then one is awarded. But, we also do a lot of what's called construction management type of delivery methods, public-private partnerships, which is where, say an institution will partner with a developer, will work for the developer. So I think there's a lot more of a series of procurement methods that will require people to think differently about partnerships and ways that a project is delivered. And I think, as we mentioned earlier as well, this idea of transparency is huge. Transparency in the design process with our clients. And, we mentioned VR earlier. I think that VR is something that will truly shape this industry. I think people being able to experience the space before it's even designed is going to help us and our clients make better design decisions.
Absolutely. I can see how that, I wouldn't have thought about that like beforehand without this conversation, but I can definitely see how that.
I think that'll be the biggest change over that 75 years, is just how technology enhances the ability to deliver the project. And we've seen in my time in this career gone from pen and paper to drawing things in CAD, which is two-dimensional, to now, I don't do it nearly as well as Kate, but drawing things in 3-dimension and being able to create renderings and videos and that kind of thing. And a little bit we use virtual reality, but I can see that will become virtual reality and augmented reality and mixed reality, and how that develops will certainly enhance how we do things. And it gets back to the point Kate mentioned of that collaborative aspect. I think that's spot on, that there will be more and more entities and disciplines and ideas that can be brought together toward a common goal and make quicker and better decisions right from the beginning.
I think also going back to the idea of sustainability and wellness, that a building isn't just about how a building looks, and not even just about how it functions internally, but about the real life quantifiable impact it has on the people that inhabit it. And, the way that, things are actually, you're going to have to edit this part out. That's all I got.
No, to that point, the point you're maybe going to make is the other part of technology is modeling and predicting how things will function, whether it's impact on people and their wellness within the space, whether it's energy use, whether it's daylight into the building. That tied in with the VR, I think as technology advances, it's never going to, in my mind, eliminate the need for creative brain power on the other side of that technology, to come up with creative solutions, to listen to clients and kind of consolidate all those ideas into one concept. But technology can enhance, and that's where I think the biggest gains will be in this industry over that 75 years.
Interesting. Well, thank you both for joining me today. It was a fascinating conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening to this episode of The Commonwealth. If you enjoyed the episode, tap that subscribe button and share the link with a friend. This show is produced by Hunter Bergman, who's running the show behind. What up, Hunter? Yeah, okay, perfect. I wanted to get your voice on. It's edited by Kyle Kua with social media promotions ran by Ashley Hansen. We'll be back in your feed soon.